Growing up, I remember hearing the same thing over and over. Money doesn't come without pain. It was like an unspoken rule embedded deep in my family's stories, in the whispers around the dinner table, in the way my parents often just resigned themselves to struggle. I can still picture my father, shoulders heavy, voice low, telling me that wealth was a gamble only for the lucky, something you had to fight fiercely for, and even then, it never came easy. And so, from a very young age, I started to believe that money was a burden, a reward hard won through sacrifice, suffering, and endless sacrifice. It wasn't just words, though. It became a kind of blueprint installed in my mind, shaping every decision I made. When I thought of investing, I imagined risking everything, feeling that underlying anxiety that if I went for it, I'd only end up on a harder path. When I looked at opportunities, I often hesitated because I believed success required long hours, struggle, and struggle that was almost inevitable. Somehow, I thought the more I suffered, the more I deserved wealth, and if I didn't suffer enough, I was just not worthy of abundance. That belief wasn't spoken aloud, but it echoed in my thoughts, in my fears, and in my choices. At some point, I started to question, what if that's all it takes to keep this cycle alive? What if the stories I grew up hearing weren't truths at all, but just stories passed down that I never challenged? I didn't have the language for it then, but inside, I felt the weight of those unspoken truths, this silent narrative that told me that money was meant to be difficult and painful to acquire. I saw how those beliefs dictated my actions. I worked hard, yes, but often with a sense of emptiness, as if the effort alone was the only way to earn respect from money, from life. And here's where it gets real. I started noticing that even when opportunities arose that could bring me ease or greater flow, I hesitated. I'd sabotage myself, hold back, put up walls in my mind because I believed deep down that if I didn't struggle hard enough, I wouldn't be truly deserving of wealth. It was almost as if I was punishing myself, keeping my own prosperity at arm's length because I felt I had to pay some silent debt for simply wanting more. But what if that's not the truth? What if we've been sold a lie? A story that's been inherited from generation to generation, that wealth is only for the suffering and the struggling. The idea that gaining abundance has to come with pain? What if, instead, I started to see money as something that could flow effortlessly? If I rewired my beliefs, if I consciously rewrote that story inside my mind? That's what I want to explore with you today. Because these beliefs, these heavy, limiting stories, deeply shape your reality. They're like mental filters that block the flow of abundance, that keep you stuck in a cycle of lack and struggle. And I know this is true because I lived it firsthand. For years, I believed that money was a reward for hardship, that if I didn't suffer for my success, I didn't truly deserve it. I thought that if I wanted wealth, I'd have to hustle harder than anyone else, fight through pain, and push myself to exhaustion. But all that did was drain my energy, fuel my frustration, and keep my dreams just out of reach. Today, I want to invite you to look at those stories you hold about money, whether they're spoken aloud or just buried deep inside, because you have the power to rewrite them. I believe that beneath those layers of inherited beliefs lies your true potential, an unshakable knowing that wealth isn't a battleground but a place of flow, of harmony, of ease. I want to help you see that the struggle isn't a requirement, that you can shift your perspective and open yourself up to abundance without suffering through it. Think about this for a moment. What if everything you've been told about money is just a story you've bought into? What if, just for today, you could start to see wealth as something natural, something that flows effortlessly when your beliefs are aligned? Imagine that, the possibility that you could release the weight of those old stories and instead embrace a new truth, that abundance is your birthright, and it comes not with pain, but with gratitude, flow, and a joyful belief in your worthiness. This is where transformation begins, by recognizing the stories that are holding us captive and then choosing to rewrite them with a new, empowering narrative. And so, I ask you, what is the story you've been holding on to about money? Do you believe that gaining wealth requires suffering? Because if you do, know that you're not alone. But more importantly, know that you can change it, starting right now. That's the journey we're on today. Once I started to question the stories I inherited, I realized how much they had dictated the way I approached financial success, almost like invisible chains holding me back from actual abundance. These beliefs acted like filters, causing me to interpret every opportunity through doubt or fear rather than openness. I'd look at someone flourishing financially and suspect they had sacrificed everything for that privilege, as if success only came with immense suffering or self-denial. That mindset created a psychological barricade that kept me from fully embracing wealth's possibility in a natural, effortless manner. The more I scrutinized my mental landscape, the clearer it became that foundational programming often pulls us into a discouraging narrative, one where struggle is the only way to grow, where ease seems almost suspicious. It's as if deep down, I thought that if I didn't push myself through strenuous effort, I wouldn't earn my share of prosperity. That thought pattern made me resist simpler, more aligned routes to achieve my goals. I'd find myself sabotaging opportunities that came with a sense of flow because I doubted their legitimacy, worried they might be too good to be true, or that I'd somehow be taking a shortcut that was unfair or undeserved. Another crucial layer is realizing how these subconscious stories fragment the experience of wealth. When I looked inward, I noticed a persistent narrative. Experiencing genuine abundance should feel like a constant struggle, with fleeting moments of relief. It's like expecting a storm to follow clear skies, an uncomfortable anticipation that prosperity only arrives dressed in chaos. This internal war between expecting difficulty and craving ease created a persistent tension, making it impossible to truly relax into a state of openness. Overthinking became my default, and as a result, I inadvertently pushed away potential blessings. Every time I thought about relaxing my grip, I would assume that I was somehow betraying my own hard work. Yet, dissolving these beliefs demands more than intellectual acknowledgement. It's about rewiring the deeply rooted wiring in the subconscious mind. Visualize a garden overrun with weeds. If you merely cut the top growth, the roots remain, ready to regrow and suffocate new, healthy plants. Making lasting transformation involves digging down to those roots, pulling out the limiting convos buried deep within, silkily woven into our mental fabric. This process requires persistent awareness, catching thought patterns as they arise, questioning their origin, and offering a different perspective that aligns with genuine abundance. It's startling to realize how much of this internal programming can operate in the background, shaping decisions that seem purely rational but are, in fact, driven by old stories and emotional conditioning from years past. One day, I began seeing how I was resisting opportunities simply because they didn't fit the mental model I'd upheld for years, one that equated easy gains with laziness, or worse, dishonesty. That habitual skepticism kept me from trusting the natural flow of wealth, preventing me from fully enjoying the benefits of inspired actions that felt authentic and joyful. Revisiting this inner landscape also uncovered how much emotional baggage I carried around failure. How I thought that making money should be an uphill climb that's paved with setbacks and stress. Yet, this relationship with wealth was rooted in a shadow negotiation I had made with myself. If I suffered enough, then I'd be worthy of comfort. Once I recognized this, I saw how it perpetuated cycles of frustration and resistance. Instead of embracing the idea that abundance is a harmonious flow, I had internalized a belief that hardship was a prerequisite for reward. Understanding that these ingrained beliefs are nothing more than mental constructs gives me the power to intentionally reshape my perception. We often forget that thoughts are like the raw materials shaping our entire experience. They can be reformed, repurposed, or even discarded entirely. It's almost as if we're artists in control of the blueprint of our reality. Yet many of us unwittingly settle for sketches drawn from childhood fears and societal programming. Once aware, a simple shift in perspective can set a process in motion, transforming alienating struggles into joyful, natural manifestations that flow with the rhythm of life. So, consider how this insight applies when you face doubts or an urge to revert to old habits. Each time your mind flickers with hesitation, it's an invitation to pause and question the story behind that thought. Is it rooted in truth or just an echo of conditioning? When I learned to do this, I began testing new beliefs, ones that saw prosperity not as a prize for pain, but as a gift that naturally gravitates toward those who are aligned, grateful, and open. This internal reset doesn't happen overnight. but each conscious choice creates a ripple effect, gradually dissolving the barriers that kept me distant from effortless richness. Reprogramming isn't about denying struggle entirely. It's about transforming how you perceive and respond to it. When you acknowledge that mental resistance is simply a signal, not a sentence, you empower yourself to choose differently. The real mastery lies in developing a new dialogue, one that affirms that ease and flow aren't signs of weakness, but expressions of alignment. The more I practiced this shift, the more I began to notice opportunities that seemed to appear out of nowhere, nudging me gently toward growth without the weight of unnecessary suffering. That's the profound shift I invite you to explore. Tuning in, questioning inherited beliefs, and consciously choosing to see prosperity as a harmonious, effortless experience. As I continued diving into the depths of my subconscious, I began noticing how many hidden assumptions lurked beneath surface-level awareness. It was like rummaging through a cluttered attic filled with outdated furniture, broken trinkets, and long-forgotten memories, all of which shaped my emotional landscape and, consequently, my financial habits. One surprising discovery was how often I associated safety with struggle. If I wasn't stretched thin, I told myself I wasn't truly making progress. That insidious idea kept me tethered to cycles of overworking, convinced that comfortable ease was a sign of complacency or laziness. In this mindset, embracing simplicity or flow felt almost like giving up, a dangerous act of surrender to laziness rather than a conscious act of trust. Furthermore, I began to realize how many of these mental structures functioned like self-fulfilling prophecies. When I anticipated difficulty at the slightest hint of abundance, I inadvertently called forth the very hardships I sought to avoid. It was as if my mind played an elaborate game, resisting effortless growth because I held that wealth was earned solely through toil, and that life rewarded persistence, no matter the cost. Consequently, whenever an opportunity appeared that promised less friction, my subconscious would trigger doubt and hesitation, as if the universe was trying to tell me, "Nope, this isn't how real success looks." Instead of viewing ease as a sign of alignment, I perceived it as a warning, something to distrust. Building on this, I recognized how often I had treated financial achievement almost as a test, something I had to pass through hardship to prove my worthiness. Sometimes, I'd set up mental hurdles, convincing myself that for prosperity to be legitimate, I needed to endure setbacks, long days, or sacrifices that felt almost like rites of passage. The irony was that this mindset kept me from experiencing genuine joy in my accomplishments because I was too busy questioning whether I deserved them. It was a continuous internal dialogue. Am I working hard enough? Have I sacrificed enough? That only reinforced the false narrative that ease equated laziness or irresponsibility. Another insight emerged when I reflected on how deeply this conditioned perspective affected my inner dialogue. Words like scarcity or lack would echo in my thoughts, creating a static that muffled the signals of abundance trying to reach me. I had trained myself to focus on what I didn't have, rather than appreciating what was already present. This habit amplified feelings of frustration and kept me distant from gratitude, an essential ingredient for attracting more of what I desire. Cultivating appreciation seemed like a foreign concept back then, almost naive, especially when debt or obligations loomed large in my mind, whispering that I'd never get ahead. But this cycle could be broken. Recognition alone opened up new pathways, like suddenly discovering a hidden door in the maze of my beliefs. Instead of reacting to circumstances from a place of fear and doubt, I started to deliberately redirect my focus onto what I appreciated: small wins, moments of ease, even the lessons learned from past struggles. These became anchors, making me realize that the emotional energy I poured into my thoughts held tremendous power. When I cultivated genuine gratitude, I reset my mental thermostat, gradually diminishing the vibrations rooted in lack and fear. It was as if I was rewiring my entire internal compass, shifting my frequency from one of scarcity to one of natural abundance. This process illuminated how much control I had over the stories I told myself every day. Changing my language about wealth, switching from what I lacked to what I already possessed, created a ripple effect that began to reshape my experience. I saw obstacles not as insurmountable walls, but as opportunities to learn and grow, opportunities that could be navigated with ease when I approached them from a different perspective. I learned that resistance often arose from internal judgments, not external realities, and that by softening internal criticism and practicing compassion for my journey, I was opening up space for new possibilities to flow in. Ultimately, confronting these mental patterns revealed a profound truth. Building a wealthy life isn't about suffering through it, but aligning oneself with the natural laws of creation, trust, patience, and joy. If I could hold on to that realization, the path to abundance felt less like a battle and more like a dance. The challenge was to keep my focus on the present moment, to see my life as a reflection of my inner dialogue rather than a series of external obstacles. Every shift I made, no matter how small, built a foundation of conviction that wealth and ease were not mutually exclusive, but inherently intertwined. I was learning that prosperity's true secret was rooted in surrendering resistance and embracing gratitude, therefore transforming the entire relationship I had with money and success. Once I understood that my mindset was like soil ripe for planting, I realized I could cultivate different seeds, seeds of abundance, rather than scarcity. I started paying attention to the subtle signals my surroundings and my inner dialogue were sending. For example, I would notice how often I overlooked small signs of progress, dismissing minor wins as insignificant, when in fact, they were signposts guiding me toward a more expansive view of prosperity. Learning to see value in steady, incremental growth shifted my focus from overnight miracles to consistent momentum. That shift in perception itself became a powerful magnet for opportunities that felt natural and effortless. I also recognized that the emotional association I attached to earning or receiving money colored every transaction I experienced. If I connected the act of giving or receiving to feelings of obligation or guilt, I unintentionally created energetic barriers that hindered the flow. Conversely, when I began to associate financial exchanges with feelings of joy, gratitude, and genuine generosity, I noticed a spark igniting within me. These positive emotional states don't just feel good, they signal alignment with abundance. They act as invitations, calling in more resources and experiences that mirror that uplifting energy. My entire relationship with money transformed when I deliberately infused every interaction with this sense of deep appreciation. Another profound realization was that inner resistance often manifests physically, sometimes as tension, impatience, or restless energy in the body. As I started tuning into these subtle sensations, I understood they were signs that I was resisting what wanted to come into my life. It was as if my nervous system was trying to tell me that I was holding on too tightly or over-controlling the process. Once aware of these signals, I could choose to breathe and relax into trust instead of forcing outcomes. This gentle act of surrender became a crucial practice. By releasing mental tightness and affirming that everything is unfolding as it should, I created space for abundance to flow more freely. The tension that once blocked progress softened, replaced by a calm expectancy. Furthermore, I began to see how my daily routines and habitual thoughts act as invisible currents shaping my experience. Small shifts in how I started and ended my day made a surprising difference. For instance, once I committed to mentally listing things I was grateful for first thing in the morning, I set a tone of openness and receptivity. Similarly, as I closed each day with acknowledgement of what I appreciated, I anchored that feeling of abundance in my subconscious. These daily rituals weren't about grand gestures, but simple, consistent choices that recondition my mind to focus on what's working instead of what's lacking. Over time, these small actions compounded, gently redirecting my mental compass toward greater possibilities. Another layer of understanding unfolded when I realized that every perception of limitation I held was a product of the boundaries I placed in my mind. I often believed there were ceilings I couldn't break through, things I simply couldn't have. But when I challenged these beliefs, asking myself, where is the proof of this restriction? I started seeing how much of what I thought was fixed was actually fluid. These mental barriers were constructed from past experiences or societal expectations, not immutable facts. Once I began to question and soften those perceived limits, my confidence grew. I dared to think bigger, ask for more, and embrace opportunities one previously dismissed as out of reach. It was like lifting a fog that had obscured my view of what was possible. The process of shifting internal stories also brought me to an important realization. The stories I tell myself about what's deserved or what I am owed shape my reality. If I approached life with an undercurrent of feeling I was somehow not enough or still had to earn my place, that sentiment would ripple outward, creating obstacles even when nothing truly stood in my way. Instead, I started affirming that I am inherently worthy, simply because I exist. This may sound small, but it's like adding a powerful current to the stream. When your sense of worth is anchored in unconditional acceptance, everything begins to align more effortlessly. External conditions may still fluctuate, but your internal state becomes a resilient anchor, attracting abundance with less resistance. Now, consider how this applies when you notice habits of doubt creeping in during your day. Recognize those moments as signals, your inner guidance system alerting you to beliefs that need revision. When you catch yourself thinking about limitations, pause and reframe. Instead of focusing on what's missing or impossible, shift your attention to what's already available or what could be created through inspired action. Cultivating this awareness allows you to rewrite mental drafts, replacing patterns of limitation with declarations of possibility. This ongoing practice of mental and emotional recalibration is what gradually rewires your experience from struggle to flow. It's an active process, one of constant trial, gentle correction, and trusting that what you focus on expands, especially when you approach it with openness and curiosity. Reflecting on this journey so far, I see the countless subtle ways in which our beliefs shape the landscape of our experience. It's like standing at the helm of a ship, where every internal current and unseen wind influences direction, sometimes gently, sometimes with overwhelming force. The impressions we carry about what's possible, what we deserve, or what's inherently difficult become the invisible map guiding our choices. These thought patterns ripple beneath consciousness, subtly steering us toward obstacles or openings that define our reality in ways we might not immediately recognize. As I piece together these insights, it becomes apparent that every mental stance we embody acts as a lens, highlighting certain elements of life while shadowing others. When the focus is fixed on limitations, it's as if a filter dims the brilliance of opportunities shining nearby. But once a shift occurs, an awakening to the malleability of internal narratives, the landscape begins to transform. Suddenly, what once seemed fixed or distant appears malleable and within reach. The realization that internal conditions act like fertile ground, ready to nurture new possibilities, is both empowering and humbling. Working through this awareness, I began to grasp just how much energy is absorbed by the stories we tell ourselves, those unspoken convictions that whisper to us, often with unwavering certainty. They act as silent architects of our sense of worthiness, of what's attainable, and of what's simply meant to be reserved for others. Yet, it's as if we're standing within a vast, open field, conditioned to believe certain areas are forbidden or inaccessible. Recognizing that these perceived boundaries are constructs allows us to step beyond imagined borders, beginning to see the landscape of potential no longer as a fixed terrain, but as a fluid expanse ripe for exploration. The accumulation of these realizations points to a pivotal understanding. Transformation is less about altering external conditions and more about reorienting internal perceptions. When awareness becomes a conscious practice, the internal terrain shifts from one of resistance to one of openness. The mind, once a battleground of doubt and obligation, can become a sacred space where new truths are cultivated, truths that align effortlessly with abundance. This isn't an overhaul rooted in force or hardship, but a gentle rebalancing, an awakening to the vibrational harmony that has always been present underneath the surface noise. In my own experience, I observed how moments of stillness and reflection served as portals, allowing these deeper layers to surface. When I paused and looked inward without judgment, the chaotic debris of old programming began to clear, revealing the luminous potential of what could be created. I noticed that unproductive mental habits often arose from a core instinct to protect oneself from disappointment, but recognizing their origin granted me the power to gently loosen their grip. It became clear that cultivating a sense of trust, An unwavering belief in the natural flow was akin to planting seeds of confidence in the fertile soil of gratitude and faith. As these seeds took root, I could sense the landscape of my thoughts shifting, beckoning opportunities that resonated with a more authentic sense of prosperity. From this vantage point, the interconnectedness of beliefs, emotions, and actions becomes undeniable. Each contributes to a vast, living web, the unseen forces that shape outcomes. When perceptions are aligned with a deeper knowing that abundance is an inherent state, external circumstances start to mirror an internal harmony. Tasks that once felt burdensome begin to feel like part of a larger, elegant dance, where flow replaces struggle and effort harmonizes with ease. That awareness fuels a transition into new ways of perceiving, empowering me to approach life not as a series of battles, but as an unfolding creation that responds lovingly to my internal shifts. In this space of understanding, patience deepens. Impatience, once a frequent visitor, transforms into a gentle prompting to stay the course. Challenges no longer seem like insurmountable walls, but as opportunities to refine belief and grow stronger in trust. Each transition, whether subtle or significant, serves as a reminder that the inner environment acts as the true catalyst for change. As I continue to nurture these new perspectives, I am reminded that the path of expansion isn't a narrow road lined with constant struggle, but a broad avenue where my conscious choices open gates to unexplored vistas. And as I stand at this threshold, I can hardly wait to see what awaits when internal alignment becomes the foundation for everything I draw into my life. Looking back, I realize how deeply these ingrained beliefs shape the very fabric of our existence, almost like invisible threads pulling us toward familiar patterns. These subconscious convictions, often rooted in childhood or societal conditioning, act as silent architects of personal reality, setting boundaries around possibilities and convincing us that fulfillment is out of reach. As I've journeyed inward to challenge these perceptions, I found myself standing in a vast open field where previously there had only been walls and limits. The realization that we are not fixed entities but fluid creators of our experiences became a turning point. It's empowering to understand that change begins from within, that thoughts shift and reshape the outer landscape. What struck me most was how the mind tends to cling to certain narratives, clinging tightly to notions that keep us chained to a sense of struggle. It's as if the mental landscape is designed to provide consistent reinforcement of scarcity, whispering that comfort and abundance are reserved for a select few, or that effortless success is somehow unjust. These beliefs develop their roots over time and become so familiar that questioning them feels like danger or betrayal. But when I started observing these stories with a curious, compassionate eye, a new clarity emerged. I saw their fleeting nature, a mirage that only seems solid because I've given them so much emotional attention. Recognizing this allowed me to gently loosen their grip, creating space for fresh, more expansive visions to take hold. A profound insight dawned when I understood that my emotional responses often act as barometers for alignment. When I felt resistance or skepticism, I realized I was operating from mental maps that no longer served my growth, maps built on the foundation of doubt or fear. Conversely, when I cultivated gratitude and trust, I sensed a subtle but undeniable shift, a warm autopilot inviting harmony into my life. Emotions became guides, showing me when my internal universe was aligned or out of sync. This awareness became a tool, one I used daily to refine my focus, to re-anchor myself in belief systems that promote flow rather than resistance. It's as if I discovered a subtle, yet powerful, internal compass that constantly points toward abundance when I listen carefully. I also began to see how crucial small, consistent acts of mental and emotional reinforcement are in shaping long-term results. Repeating affirmations, immersing myself in visions of success, and consciously acknowledging signs of progress rewired my subconscious programming over time. These weren't grand efforts. Rather, they were gentle, deliberate choices that gradually shifted my internal narrative from one of limitation to one of possibility. With each repetition, I reminded myself that richness isn't something I must earn through sacrifice, but an innate state accessible anytime I attune myself to it. This shift in awareness transformed the way I approached daily life. Less about forcing outcomes and more about co-creating with the universe from a place of openness and gratitude. Throughout this process, I learned that patience isn't passive waiting but active trust. Challenging deeply held beliefs requires continuous practice, an ongoing dialogue between the mind and the heart. Dipping into moments of doubt was inevitable. Embracing them without judgment became vital. Instead of fighting feelings of uncertainty, I learned to welcome them as signals, opportunities to look deeper inside and reaffirm my intentions. I discovered that real change manifests in subtle ways, often without dramatic signs or immediate results. Trusting that shifts are happening beneath the surface allowed me to relax my grip on outcomes, knowing that as long as I remained aligned emotionally and mentally, everything was working in my favor, even if visible signs seemed slow or sparse at times. Now, I see this understanding as a gift, the reminder that creation is a sacred dance, not a fierce competition. When I release the need to control every detail and instead focus on embodying inner harmony, life unfolds with a grace I never knew possible. The internal shifts feed back into my outer reality, attracting experiences that resonate with my newfound sense of worthiness and ease. Whatever challenges arise now serve as gentle lessons rather than obstacles, reaffirming my trust in the process. I carry the awareness that conscious choice and heartfelt intent are the true catalysts, powerful forces that can transform an entire life when wielded with love and conviction. So, I invite you to see yourself as a masterful creator, capable of redefining every limiting belief that tries to hold you back. Recognize that the conscious steps you take today lay the groundwork for a future built on abundance, flow, and fulfillment. It's a continuous journey, the art of tuning in to what truly matters and releasing what no longer aligns. When you start noticing how much power resides in your thoughts, feelings, and actions, you understand the path is not about forcing change, but about awakening to what has always been beneath the surface, your innate capacity to craft a life of effortless joy and prosperity. Simply remember that the next step is always within your reach, waiting for you to choose that new, more expansive version of yourself.